Alright, let's talk about how politicized language impacted the identities of non-whites in Britain. Politicized language included words like colored or black or immigrant. This language was used to separate non-whites into a group of others when white people were just called English. The word immigrant is in there because even if non-whites did have citizenship for being born in Britain, they would still be referred to as immigrants. The word immigrant also has negative ties to when non-white immigrants were not given the citizenship they were entitled to after World War II by Britain, when the Commonwealth Immigrants Act was passed in 1962 by Parliament to restrict the access of non-white people into the country. Politicized language was also used in names of the movement organizations such as League of Colored People in Britain in the 1920s and 30s to demonstrate race solidarity. The Windrush generation were the Afro-Caribbean migrants who were advertised laboring jobs post-war by Britain and arrived there between 1952 and 1961. The Windrush generation and all non-white people coming to Britain since the Second World War would face forms of informal segregation, such as denial of government housing assistance and being placed in slum housing. Conflict occurred within families because of the different dynamics each member would have in relation to their experiences being in Britain and their non-white identities. For example, some Caribbean-born children from the Windrush generation would feel culture shock in Britain when they had more comfortable living situations in their birth country than their siblings who were born in Britain and are accustomed to the less comfortable housing that they're subjected to, causing tension. They would also have a difficult time adjusting to the racism that they might not have experienced in the Caribbean. The color caste system in Britain was unusual for many children of the Windrush generation, and they were made well aware of their race, being the different one. In the Caribbean, all children belonged to the same race, even if their skin color differed a bit. But in Britain, there was white and black as distinct racial groups. The difference in hair textures between the Britons and Afro-Caribbean teens created a further divide between the races and showcased how beauty politics influenced the self-image and hair rituals of Afro-Caribbean teens. When in the Caribbean, it was the norm for girls to have their hair unprocessed until they were adults, or sometimes for their whole lives, to maintain the health of their hair. But in Britain, natural hair was straightened and put in white hairstyles, or hidden, mostly. Black hair salons opened up in Britain in the 1970s when the hair care industry started to become a bigger industry in London. Black businesswomen opened up salons to service other Black women and gained economic autonomy in this way. These salons became communities for women to socialize with other women of the same ethnicity as well.
Hello, my name is Tristan Stallworth, and today I will be presenting Soul Style and Pan-African. Hello, my name is Tristan Stallworth, and today I will be presenting Soul Style and Pan-African Expression and the Black Panther Youth League in Great Britain. So, referring to Soul Style, in Britain, a lot of these Black British youngsters, they were born from people who, when they moved to Britain, were forced to give up their middle-class statuses from their native African and Caribbean countries. And so this sort of diaspora created a new Pan-African style or mode of dress that combined not only African and Caribbean but also African American styles of fashion and thinking, masculinity, femininity, into this one single broad soulful genre. these styles illustrated a modern intertwining of racial politics and style. Those who fought for equality expressed it in many fashions, including in manly fashion. So, referring to the Black Panther Youth Fleet, this was the first independent chapter of the U.S. Black Panther Party, and their main goals were kind of different. The Black Panther Party was a very self-defense, Second Amendment gun-oriented party, but in the UK, they had stricter gun laws, so this was more of a movement which still focused on things like self-defense, but in the UK, police violence was more so things like intense beatings instead of gun violence. So this was created during sort of a brain drain in Britain, or in the UK, where a lot of leading Black thinkers were leaving to support causes, nationalistic causes in West Africa and the Caribbean. So the Black Panther movement, this chapter, took to educating the youth, right? And appealing to the youth, they gave the youth self-defense training to be able to defend themselves not only from police, but also from white vigilantes. They gave them ideological texts focusing in leftist causes to further their knowledge in these political beliefs, and also encouraged the soul style that we talked about, that sort of instilled their racial dignity within the youth, right? And in Britain, British Black youth, they were excluded from typical student extracurriculars. They were labeled incompetent and unteachable by teachers and put onto vocational tracks that prevented them from getting, from getting a pure academic education. And they were also faced with their places of gathering, their sort of safe spaces, being shut down by authorities. So really being able to attract Black youth in Britain, it reignited this fight for racial equality in this sort of brain drain. So yeah, thanks.
Olive Morrison sexualized police brutality. In her youth, Morris was easily visible in the police brutality campaign because of her personality and androgynous style. Morris employed masculine and feminine attributes in her expression to better portray her militancy and challenge the notion of feminine propriety. Ford adopts the word queer to describe her style because she intentionally dresses against gender norms. Because of her unwillingness to conform to societal standards of gender, police would often punish her differently. She was known to date men, but because of her style, police would often make homophobic sexual threats. The presence of Morris in the movement helps us understand how soul power is linked with gender nonconformity. Law enforcement would constantly survey areas they deemed suspicious. Nigerian diplomat Clement Gomak parked outside of Desmond where his family was shopping. Desmond was an area where Morris and her peers frequented and was under constant police surveillance. The police saw his white Mercedes and immediately began to interrogate the diplomat. He was physically removed from his vehicle and accused of stealing the car. The sus law is what allowed the police to do this. The law initially applied to whites who were conducting illegal transactions on the waterfront, but as the Black population grew, the law became a shield that allowed racial profiling. It is similar to the stop and frisk here in the U.S. Morris was on her way to Desmond when she witnessed the harassment of the Nigerian diplomat. Many bystanders got involved to stop the police from beating Gomak and violence broke out. Morris had arrived after Gomak had been wrongly arrested but had gotten involved with the crowd to assist her friends against the violent police. At one point, Morris was grabbed by the neck and leg and shoved into a van. In that van, she was assaulted by the officers, where she was repeatedly hit in the chest and slapped in the face. Arlene, a friend of Morris who had also been arrested, let the officers know that Morris was in fact a woman. The officers took a look at Morris and saw her androgynous style and deemed that she was not. they continued to beat, harass, and yell racial slurs at Morris and her comrades. While detained, Morris' femininity was constantly attacked by the London police force. She was separated from her female and male comrades. They would make fun of the way she dressed, question her gender, and force Morris to prove that she was a woman. They threatened Morris with corrective rape and humiliated her because of her non-conforming style. After her encounter with the London police force and her sentencing, Morris was brave enough to share her story in the local newspaper. Most published works omitted the sexual assault that occurred. Oftentimes, police brutality is presented as a black male issue, but Morris' story is one of the many examples of how black women are affected as well. Her story moved other black women in the London area, and along with Geraldine Bean, Morris went on to establish the Brixton Black Women's Group. Another organization she founded was co-founded in February 1978. The organization drew from various political ideologies such as U.S. black feminism, black nationalism, anti-imperialism, and Marxism. The initial meeting was a mix of women from BBWG and university students who were primarily African. The organization was originally envisioned as a pan-Africanist feminist group that would link women throughout the African diaspora. Since Asian women were also victims of police brutality, workforce discrimination, and gender-specific forms of repression, the leaders of OWA decided to expand the focus to encompass all black women in Britain. The name was later changed to the Organization of Women of Asian and African Descent, and it served as a coordinating committee that worked with other women-focused organizations.
The legacy of Black British feminism. This is the final section of Chapter 5, and some of the main arguments in it are Olive Morris's contribution to Black British feminism and the formation of the Black woman's post-colonial identity. In 1979, Olive Morris died from cancer. Despite her death, Morris left an unforgettable legacy that contributed greatly towards the liberation of Black people, and more specifically, Black women. One of Morris's friends that was with her when she was in the hospital dying, and during some of the marches, her name was Stella Dadsey, spoke highly about Morris, saying that she represented a generation of women, and beyond that, she represented a moment in historical change that allowed Black British people to define new ethnicities and new Black identities. When we think of Olive Morris in the context of Black British feminism, it's important to recognize the addition she made to the formation of the Black British identity. Contributing towards the quest for soul power, which is described in the text as a movement that charts the migration of Caribbean-born teens who had to move to Britain during their adolescence, Olive Morris sought out to empower them and helped allow them to form a new identity. Coining the term Black British rather than Afro-British or Black Britons, Olive Morris also helped develop a language that combated oppression and acknowledged various identities of Black British teens who fell under the category of African, Caribbean, African American, or British. Claiming this identity, the Black British identity, was a proclamation of ownership of their identity and control over their selves in their own bodies. Described in the text, Olive Morris's impact on Black British feminism allowed for not only more women-centered discourse, but more Black women-centered discourse. We look at Black feminism in America and how it intentionally targets the most marginalized groups of people in America, which is Black women. We can also look at Britain and think the same thing. Black women are at the crossroads of oppressions. They have dual oppressions, such as being a woman and being a Black person. Using soul culture as a guide, women were able to exchange ideas and talk about attitudes they had towards the new ethnicities, and were able to create new identities. Black women were able to constitute what defines the post-colonial Black woman, forming discussions around natural hairstyles such as the afro, African American inspired clothing and accessories, and So style, which linked Black feminism to Black British and African American women. Um, all of these ideas that Olive Morris brought to the table about identity allowed Black women to reclaim ownership over their mixed identities and create liberation within a single group.